Episode 8, You Weren't Lying. Everything I share in this podcast is based on my personal experiences, my interpretation of events, and the documentation and evidence I've collected along the way. All individuals mentioned are considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. What you're hearing is my account of how things unfolded, as I saw them, heard them, and understood them at the time. Every episode up until now has been grounded in the same approach. Lived experiences supported by records and details. This episode is no different, but episode 8 digs deeper. It's sharper, heavier, and yes, it has a little more spice than usual. I'll present the timeline as I've come to understand it, and you can decide for yourself what to make of it. I'll never forget the moment that my grandmother Lois finally admitted what I had been trying to tell her for so long. One time, when I went and visited her, she looked at me and whispered, "I'm starting to see that you weren't lying to me." The fact that she whispered was very curious, but it was a turning point. For the first time, she acknowledged that Darren and Melissa weren't just influencing her, they were invading her privacy inside her own home. She knew they were listening, and not in some abstract paranoid sense. They were literally using her Alexa devices, one by her bed, another by her couch, to use the drop-in feature and eavesdrop. I even saw it with my own eyes. Whenever I stopped by, the devices would suddenly make a strange noise, and the screen would flash and say someone had connected. Someone was on the other end, listening in real time to everything being said. We even discovered that all of the people that were hired to help Lois and Chet every week were also reporting everything back to Melissa at her request. I don't blame them, they were conned as well. Lois admitted to me that for a long time, she had believed what Melissa told her, or maybe she just didn't want to think that Melissa would lie to her. But now, she was starting to question things. She told me that Melissa had said that I had zero equity in my townhouse, and if anything, negative equity. She told Lois that I had insisted that she not be put on the title of the house so that I could trick my grandfather and flip it for a profit. The truth was, my grandfather had been the one who originally didn't want her added, but that was because he was worried she'd have difficulty signing documents because of the problems that she was having with her hands. But in the end, she was put on title anyway, not like anyone objected to it. Then there was the fake Zillow listing. Melissa had shown it to Lois as proof that I was secretly trying to sell the house. And I'll admit it, if you're looking at those things through a certain lens, or worse, if someone is purposely spinning it that way, maybe even fabricating pieces of it, it doesn't look good. That's what Melissa was counting on. I still wonder if Melissa created that listing. Through all this, though, my grandfather Chet never changed his stance. He stayed consistent. He always told me that I hadn't done anything wrong. We still talked, not as often as we used to, but enough for me to know that he believed me. And that gave me the strength to keep going. When Chet and Lois got their new security cameras installed in their house, Melissa and Darren helped make arrangements and hired who they called the Geek Squad. The guys showed up in a black BMW and regular clothes, no logos. Darren also made sure the cameras were set up under his Google account. So, if my grandfather wanted to log in and check them, he had to sign in through Darren's profile. Think about that. They were his cameras for his own house, but Darren was the one holding the keys. Being curious, I called Best Buy and asked them if they had sent people to my grandfather's address, and they confirmed they were not from there. They had nothing to do with the people that were at Chet's house. Melissa and Darren never let my grandparents take control of those cameras, and it was obvious they were watching. Every time someone pulled into the driveway or came to the door, Melissa would call and ask, "Who's there? Why are they there?" It made my grandparents uncomfortable. They asked Darren more than once for full control of their system, but Darren wouldn't give it up. He kept saying that his company, Westcom Credit Union, was in charge of his Google account, and he didn't know how to log into his personal Gmail. That same year, my son Jason and I were supposed to go to the LA Auto Show with Pa, like we had done the year prior, but things had gotten impossible. Melissa and Darren were making it sound like Pa couldn't or shouldn't go. So instead, my dad took me and Jace. We had a great time, but I couldn't help but feel they were stopping Chet from doing what he wanted to do. At the end of December, my cardiologist sat me down and told me that the external heart monitor that I'd been wearing just wasn't doing the job. It wasn't recording any of the episodes that I was having, so she recommended we take the next step, putting one inside my chest. It wasn't a big, bulky thing, nothing like a pacemaker. This was a small device, maybe an inch long, slipped just under the skin on the left side of my chest, right over my pec. Once it was in, it would connect wirelessly to a unit next to my bed. That unit would pick up the signals and send them straight back to my cardiologist, day and night. We scheduled the procedure for the beginning of the new year, and while it wasn't a major surgery, just knowing a device was going to be living inside my chest was a big moment for me. Another reminder that at that point in my life, stress and health issues were piling on from every direction. Back in November of 2018, I had a mole removed. No big deal at the time, but my dermatologist's office happened to overlook the borderline property. And when I was there, I couldn't help but think about what had happened that night at Borderline. From that office, you had a bird's eye view right over the new fences that they had put up. From the street, you couldn't see in anymore, but from the office windows, you could. And it always brought my mind back to that night. Then, on January 4th, 2019, I got a letter from my dermatologist. It said the biopsy came back as mildly dysplastic nevus. Basically, it had some irregular borders, but it wasn't cancer. I just needed some follow-up visits. But here's the thing. When I first read that letter, I misunderstood it. I thought it said I had melanoma. For a moment, I truly believed I had skin cancer. I panicked. I had to look it up on Dr. Google and figure out what was going on, which both helped and made things worse. Looking back, the doctor had told me what to watch out for, gave me all of the information I needed, but I wasn't absorbing it. My focus was somewhere else entirely. I was stuck staring out the window, back at the borderline property, replaying the memories and emotions. That just overshadowed everything. Then, just a week later, on January 11th, 2019, I had the heart monitor procedure I talked about earlier. On the way home, my Fireline app buzzed. Fireline, for those who don't know, is an app that tracks active fires and emergencies in your area. The alert said that there was a structure fire just 3 houses down from my parents' house. And I knew an elderly woman lived there alone, so I grabbed a fire extinguisher and ran straight over. When I got inside, the fireplace was shooting flames. The gas was still on, and because there was so much creosote building up in the chimney, the fire had spread fast. I shut off the gas and got the flames in the fireplace and carpet under control. Then I ran outside to check the chimney. Smoke was still pouring out halfway up. I tried to climb into a trash can to get a better look, but it collapsed underneath me, and I fell, hurting myself. I scrambled back inside, shoved towels around the bottom of the fireplace to block any water, then ran out again with a hose and sprayed water straight into the chimney. Somehow, I got the fire out. The fire department showed up later and confirmed it was handled, but that's when things got awkward. The owner didn't recognize me. She had no idea who I was, even though I grew up down the street. The fire chief pulled me aside and started asking sharp questions, and I could tell this wasn't small talk. It was an investigation. They were trying to figure out if maybe I'd started the fire or was looking to take advantage of the situation. Thankfully, neighbors came over and explained what they saw. They told the chief I lived down the street, that my dad's house was only a few doors away, and that they'd seen me run in with the extinguisher after they already called the fire department. That cleared things up, but it was still an uncomfortable moment. And it didn't end there. The very next day, I saw the homeowner walking her dog past my house. I ran over to ask her how she was doing and asked if there was any damage from the fire, and she just looked at me, completely blank. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. She didn't remember there being a fire at her house at all. After that, I found out that she had advanced Alzheimer's, and judging by the people out looking for her that day, she probably wasn't supposed to be out wandering around on her own. Suddenly, The awkwardness from the night before made sense. She didn't remember any of it. She truly had no idea why I was there. On April 15th, 2019, something happened that really caught my attention. My cousin Jared made another public post on Facebook, and in that post, he flat out said that our grandparents, Chet and Lois, were being abused. This time, he wasn't coming after me. Someone asked him if any police reports had actually been filed, and Jared replied, quote, "Already done so. Suspects are Melissa Williams Spencer and Darren Williams, CEO of Westcom. Please call the sheriff's non-emergency number at number redacted and Adult Protective Services at number redacted to report the abuse of Chet and Lois Spencer." That wasn't just some vague family drama being aired out on social media. Jared named the names. He identified Melissa and he identified Darren, along with his title at Westcom Credit Union. And I can confirm for myself that Westcom has been made aware of these allegations because I personally reported them too. That same day, Jared sent me a private message on Facebook Messenger. He said, quote, "I want to say that I was wrong. I am sorry for being blinded. I understand if that doesn't make up for what I said, but need to say this nonetheless. I wish only the best for you and your family. Be safe and be loved, EJ. Again, I am sorry I was so wrong. By the way, on a humor note, thank you for having a backbone like you did. No matter what, I did respect that from you, and you never said crap again. It takes balls to fight people like that." End quote. I explained to him that I've been through a lot, and it's not like I never wanted to hear from him again, but I just had to play the cards that I was dealt, and his posts denouncing my family was surprising, especially the fact that Melissa was so on board with it. But at that point, I just figured that more lies were being spread. Jared replied saying, quote, "Just realized it's directed her way now. Consider my stance and approach before, and just know you're not the target." End quote. From then on, I imagine that Jared's relationship with Melissa wasn't the same, but just like she always seems to do, it's always been because of her own doing. Between 2019 and 2020, a lot of things happened, but to be honest, I can't remember all of the details, and we find out some of them later anyway, but part of it was just the normal blur of life, and part of it was because of the pandemic. When COVID hit, everything slowed down. We never got the chance to go over to Chet and Lois's house. They were terrified of getting sick, and we had to stay away, especially since we had little kids. So for the story, and for this timeline, I think it makes sense to skip ahead, because the real turning point, the moment where everything really started to unravel, wasn't in 2019 or 2020. It was in 2021. That's where the story really picks up. On January 28th, 2021, Melissa and Darren closed escrow on a brand new construction home. The price tag? $3,440,500. And in my mind, that house marked the end of everything, but also the beginning of us finally uncovering the truth. We still weren't speaking directly with Melissa and Darren at that point, but we were hearing updates from Chet and Lois. They told us about the construction, about the plans, and about how Darren and Melissa were trying to convince them to move into the new place. And it didn't stop there. Melissa and Darren were also planning on selling Chet and Lois's house to help fund their mansion. On top of that, they were trying to persuade my Aunt Wendy to sell her house and move in too. At first, when you hear something like that, it almost sounds like a big family dream, like let's all be together under one roof like a compound. But that's when you peel it back. It wasn't about togetherness at all. It was about selling off other people's homes to fund their own. I'll never forget the call from my grandfather. He told me Melissa needed $800,000 in cash, not for bills, not for emergencies, for a pool in her backyard because no bank would finance it. In the summer of 2021, our family went through some major losses. On June 18th, Chet and Lois's son, Scott, passed away. Just a few months later, on September 16th, my Aunt Wendy's husband, Mark, passed away too. Two deaths in such a short amount of time. And in both cases, Melissa tried to step in and take control, as she normally does. She positioned herself like she was going to handle the funerals. She said she was even going to cover some of the expenses, but in reality, nothing ever really came together. When Mark passed, Chet ended up paying $900 out of his own pocket just to have an autopsy done, to try and understand how he died. But Melissa called and arranged for him to be cremated immediately, without everyone's agreement. She said she did this because no one else was doing anything, and claimed that if she didn't step in, Mark was going to be buried in a pauper's grave, which was completely untrue. But this was another example of Melissa taking matters into her own hands, making decisions, and then justifying them later with a story that didn't match reality. In October of 2021, Melissa came to Chet and Lois with a request. She asked them for $20,000, supposedly to fix a scar that she had from her teenage years when she struggled with bad acne. Back then, when she was a teenager, my grandmother had taken her to a clinic to try to get it treated. The clinic didn't do a good job, and for years, my grandmother carried this guilt. She felt terrible that they couldn't afford a better care for her at the time. So when Melissa brought it up again as an adult, my grandmother's instinct was to want to help her. But here's the thing. Melissa was married to a millionaire. Why was it suddenly my grandparents' responsibility to cover something like that? Chet and Lois never thought that it would actually cost that much anyway. And yet, it didn't even end there. Instead of waiting for approval or figuring something out with them, Melissa just went ahead and logged in directly to Lois's bank account and transferred herself the money. That account, by the way, was at the credit union where her husband, Darren, was the president and CEO. We later found out that when Chet and Lois's account was created, Melissa was added as an authorized user so she could help monitor it. That's how she had access, and that's how she was able to transfer the money. It's important to remember, Melissa used to work as a branch manager at Westcom Credit Union. That's actually how she met Darren in the first place, while he was president and CEO. So she knew the system, she knew how things work, and she had access, and she used it. In November of 2021, Chet was trying to plan something special for Lois. He wanted to take her on trips to Carmel, a place they both loved. At the time, they had a mobility van, one of those with a lift seat that could pick her up from the street and bring her into the car. But things were getting harder for Lois, so she was relying on her wheelchair more. She told Chet that she wanted to look into getting a different van that could actually accommodate her chair. So Chet did what anyone would do. He logged into their account to see if they had enough money to afford the new van. But when he checked, most of his money was gone. He saw withdrawals, a $10,000 withdrawal, and two separate $50,000 withdrawals. One of those transfers went straight from Lois's account into Melissa's account, and another into Darren's account. And this was after the $20,000 that Melissa had already taken for her cosmetic surgery. My grandmother Lois saw this with her own eyes. She picked up the phone and called Melissa and confronted her directly. And Melissa broke down crying. She immediately said that she was so sorry, but explained that they needed the money for the new house, specifically for their backyard. Lois didn't hold back. She told Melissa flat out that she had already said no. She had made it clear before that she wasn't giving them any money for that house, and under no circumstances was Melissa supposed to take any money out of their accounts. But Melissa kept apologizing over and over, and then she made a promise. She said that when Darren got his $1 million annual bonus, she would pay them back. But after money started disappearing, Melissa and Darren basically cut off communication. They stopped returning Chet and Lois's calls, even though my grandparents were desperate. They just wanted their money back so that they could pay their bills and live out what they knew were their final years in peace. At one point, Chet finally got Darren on the phone. He told him directly they wanted their money back. But it wasn't just about the cash. Chet also demanded the return of his guns, Lois's rings and jewelry, and even their trust documents, which they had never been given a copy of. That part goes back to 2019. Melissa had been trying to push Lois into a long-term care facility along with Chet, but Chet didn't want to leave his home, and he certainly didn't want to give up his firearms, guns he had earned and carried with pride during his years as commander for the LAPD. So Darren stepped in, claiming he would help. He picked up the guns to store them safely at his house. Along with them went Lois's jewelry and other valuables. Later, when Lois was being interviewed by a social worker to see if she qualified for the assisted living home, she made it clear she didn't want to leave her home. But Melissa and Darren kept pushing, kept insisting that she needed to go. Lois told us that she asked to be denied so that she wouldn't have to go through with it. At this point, Chet and Lois had finally had enough. Lois contacted her daughter Wendy to talk to her about my dad taking over the trust and becoming trustee, but first they would have to get it back so that they can see what was actually in it. They feared the worst. They wouldn't ask my dad to take over for a few months. What none of us realized at the time was that the so-called trust, the one most of us didn't even know existed, was already in place. And that secret trust was about to change everything. It put Chet and Lois's entire life as they knew it in jeopardy. Come back next Sunday for the next episode of the Spencer Files.